How's it going? It's been a while since I've done one of these videos, so I thought I'd just put one up tonight and try to get back into the rhythm of doing that. I've been so busy on Turbo that I kind of forgot about posting these kinds of videos. So yeah. Speaking of Turbo, thanks for everyone who's been trying it out. Been getting a lot of good feedback from people, a lot of good suggestions and bug reports and things like that. So I appreciate that. It's been very, very helpful. Certainly from guys like Ian Daly and Nick Wees and people like that. I really appreciate it, and your feedback is really really helpful. And guys like Jimmy Hong. So hopefully you'll keep on using it, and that it's helping solve your problems. I hope. Um, Moving forward, I'm going to build in a developer showcase page on Turbo where people like companies, startups can look at developer profiles on Turbo for people who have used Turbo to build projects. Um, so that hopefully it'll be a good way for you to get your name out there and start meeting people, companies that are hiring to develop things for Turbo. So that'll be hopefully that should be something testable in the next 7 to 14 days, and then hopefully it'll help people like you find jobs and make new contacts in the tech scene and start building a reputation with companies in the tech scene. Speaking of, it's a pretty good segue into what I want to talk about today. So, it's September 5, I think, September 3rd, 2 days off. That's pretty unusual. So, September 3rd, it's Labor Day tomorrow, and then if my personal experience is any indication, right after Labor Day, all the companies, the tech companies, business in general, kind of kicks back into work mode, and all these people come back. And it's a good time for hiring to happen. So in my experience, contract-wise, it's been a good time to pick up some contracts for September and October, and maybe like going into Thanksgiving, so first half of November. It's pretty much like kind of like mating season for tech companies, and they hire. It's a good time to, if you're looking for a job, now's a good time to get your resume out and start making some contacts. Obviously, things slow down over the holidays, and then once after New Year's, it picks up again. So this is like one of the good hiring periods of the 12-month year. So the next good hiring cycle is like January through May, give or take. So that's another good time. So with that said, I wanted to get into some of the things that I've noticed with people that I've been talking to. I put out a couple ads looking to hire like junior devs to help me out with Turbo, and yeah, the responses were mostly bad. Um, and what distinguishes a good one from a bad one I want to get into today. So the one of the things that really gets under my skin is when a person responds to a post, and I put these up on like Hacker News, Reddit, a couple on Facebook. Nothing too like I didn't go on Indeed or anything like that. So it's pretty like what's the word, like low key, I guess is the word, or like a little bit less formal than you would expect. However, there are still certain things that you need to understand about when you want to apply for a job per se, or hoping somebody will hire you for even just a part-time position. Um, the I would say 60-70% of the responses were people like, "Hey, I really want that job. Let me know how many hours are available." Things like that. Hey, I've been emailing you about this job. I could really use the work. That kind of thing. And it's very like, that's not the way you approach it. It's very amateur. It's borderline unprofessional. And it shows a stunning lack of understanding of another person's perspective, as if I care that you need a job, right? So, um, that I care, as if I really care that you need money right now. That just doesn't concern me. What concerns me is whether or not you can deliver what I need. So on my post, I'm very, very specific about what I need. I say, I put up YouTube videos on an average, a couple times a week, the tutorial videos, which hopefully you guys watch on my station. And I would like it if somebody can go through those videos and transcribe them into written tutorials for my website. Right, so it gives me more content on my website, more things to post, things like that, more content. And that's a good way to keep my content flow going where I'm not spending hours upon hours transcribing a video. Like for me, one of these videos into a written tutorial, it takes about 2 hours, give or take. So that's a long time that I don't want to spend doing that. So I can train someone to do that. Very, very specific, very clear. I said it would be good if you have some programming background, but it's not, it's not essential. It will just help, right? And there were some good responses. One guy got back to me saying like I did, the Udacity course or the Udemy course on Python, Django. He was able to deploy a simple Flask API on Amazon. Um, and then he's been working on JavaScript lately, and just like, here's what I can do for you, right? He didn't even mention what he wanted. He wasn't like, how many hours can I get? Like, I really need this job because I pay for college, stuff like that. There was just none of that. He was like, this is what I can do. Let me know if this is what you need, and I'd love to continue this conversation. Well, guess what? I hired him. That was an easy hire, right? Because he just said, this is what I'm doing. And I said, no, that was actually not the norm. Most people were like, hey, I need a job. I saw your post on Hacker News, and I need to do, like, something during my off hours in school. And again, that's just so much the wrong way to go about it, because it tells me where your head's at, and it tells me that I won't be able to communicate with you. Like, you're going to deliver substandard results. You're going to expect to be paid. You're going to have a sort of an entitlement mentality. Um, People like me, I've hired many people in the past, mostly assistant, junior level type things, and you get a sense of like how people operate over a long period of time. Like, you get a sense of what the norms are, especially with like younger people. I'm looking at more college and grad school students because this isn't like a full-time job. Um, but I find this one or two people who I like, and then I just basically cram them with as much work as possible. Like their hours go as as high as they can handle essentially, because it's pretty hard to find anyone who's good, right? So really, once you start applying to jobs, I don't know where you are in this sort of trajectory of your career, but once you start looking, really focus on what the company wants rather than what you need from the job. It would seem obvious, but they're clearly not training this, at least in the college and grad school level. So if you're of that age group, let's say under 25, if you can develop that mentality, you automatically you have a head up on your peers, because they're just not teaching this in school. And I'm talking, like, I'm in New York City. I'm hearing from like NYU and Columbia students, and these are the people I'm talking about. These aren't like, like, well, I mean, I'm not going to rip on any college, but like, these aren't like, high school junkie dropouts. Like, these are like highly educated kids, right? And they just don't have this mentality, and it shows me a stunning lack of just preparation and just understanding, the other person's point of view. Ironically, one of the people I hired, he's a freshman. He's 18, and he was just like, "Yep, I can do this. I can do this for you. I can do this. If any of this sounds good to you, let's sit down for a cup of coffee." And I was like, "All right, let's figure this out." And that's it. So definitely make sure you approach positions from that angle when you're writing your cover letter, your intro email, whatever you do. Again, it is actually pretty surprising what percentage of people don't have this basic fundamental skill down. It's not complicated, it's not hard. You don't have to be a genius. You just focus on the other person's needs. And then if you as long as you do that, what you want will be reciprocated. Or at least it should be. I mean, obviously there are shitty bosses and shitty businesses, but for the most part, you should be dealing with reasonable, level-headed people, people who just have something that needs to get done, and then whatever you need to do to make that happen. That those are the kinds of people, by and large, you'll be dealing with, hopefully, or at least you should. Um, yeah, so there's that. Um, so yeah, now is a good time to start. If you're looking for freelance web dev work, this is usually a good time to start sending out some resumes and getting your name out there and whatnot. Um, uh, Sticking with that topic, because I'm a contract developer, I'm a consultant, and so I interview with potential new clients. I'll say roughly on average like 2 or 3 times a month, so like almost once a week. That's going to kick up in September and October. That's going to like dial up to maybe at least once a week. Um, but that's sort of just an ongoing fact of my life is I'm just meeting new possible clients, prospective clients, and hopefully picking up new business along the way, right? That's an ongoing cycle for me. So another thing I wanted to get into today was how to handle certain types of companies and businesses in an interview context, an interview situation. Um, so by and large, I deal with early stage startups, Series A or earlier. So startups that have maybe $1 million of funding or less, and maybe teams of like 10 or so, in total team of 10, like maybe a dev team of 4, maybe none, maybe I'm the only dev, like a small team, right? Um, and I've also worked with a handful of development agencies, dev shops, and so I have some experience there as well. So take that for what it's worth. I haven't interviewed with the big companies like Google or Amazon. I haven't tried that. It hasn't been in my my experience. So uh, everything I'm about to go through don't that doesn't factor in for like the Teslas and those companies. So the very large companies. Um, so yeah, right now, if you're dealing with a tech startup that has no tech help, that you would be the only engineer. Well, first of all, ask yourself if you even want that position, right? Because you'll have no senior leadership, so your personal development might be compromised as a result of that. So just maybe that's a factor of consideration. But let's say you do want to move forward, right? Let's say you do want to pursue this role. Um, these are interesting situations because oftentimes you're dealing with a guy, a non-technical person, who's making a hiring decision that he's just badly not qualified to make. And then, like, these are the mistakes that get made over and over and over again. So, on some level, you might be that mistake. And don't take that the wrong way, but you might be that guy that they shouldn't have hired at the price that they want to pay. So, right now, I have one friend who's going through that right now. He's being paid over $100 an hour, and he's probably worth around 30 on the open market. He has less than 1 year of professional development experience, right? How does that even happen, right? How does that even come to pass? Well, generally what happens is you get a company that has maybe 2 or 3 founders that raised a couple $100,000, and then they have all this money, and then they think that by spending $100 a month, I'm sorry, $100 an hour, they're getting like senior level work. Well, I mean, theoretically, that's what should be happening, but they they're not qualified to make that hiring decision. And what happens is um, they they'll end up hiring someone way over market, um, leading to bad outcomes. That actually was me once. I was that guy once. I was hired for $100 an hour. I think I told the story before. My first job, my first consulting gig as an iOS developer going back to 2012, the guy just hired me at $100 an hour right off the bat, and that whole assignment kind of blew up in my face. Like I was not ready for it. I was not qualified. It did not end well. To this day, I think about how I would have done that differently. So if you're interviewing with a startup in that position, you might kind of sort of luck into that, if you want to call that even lucky. But you might end up sort of making more than your market value would suggest now, or your experience would suggest. That's only going to work under certain circumstances. Like right now, it would have to be React or React Native with some element of Redux, because the market is still tight there. Believe it or not, it's still pretty tight. So if you have some React Native with Redux experience, um, especially if you can set up like an API or something like that, a backend, then even if it's your first or second gig professionally ever, you might be able to get a high rate, $75 an hour, 80 bucks an hour, even $100 an hour in the Bay Area. That's all market supply and demand dynamics, um, and a lot of that, interviewing with these kinds of companies, it's the soft skills involved are the following. You basically just play to their egos. you say, "Oh wow, that's an amazing idea. Like that's brilliant. I'm surprised like nobody's done that yet, or like you must have a patent on this." And like, oh, you like basically impress the founders with themselves. It's number one. Number two, throw in some buzzwords that they probably haven't heard of, or like just hear every now and then when they go to meetups trying to recruit. Like, oh yeah, I'm very comfortable with like asynchronous functions, and I use Redux and Redux Saga and all that stuff, and I'm looking at GraphQL and hooking it up with an Apollo, Apollo on the React side. They won't know what any of this means. I mean, you could even make up words, to be honest, but I mean, you get the idea. Um, and basically what you're doing here in the situation is you're playing to their sense of vanity. So these founders think they're hiring like an MIT level person because their company's so they think that highly of their own company, right? And if you can present yourself as that guy, you're basically impressing them with themselves, and then they want to hire you. They just like having you around. You make them feel better about themselves, and that's the strategic angle to play in these interviews when there are no tech people on the team. And that's I've been in that position many times. I would say about maybe half my contract volume is in that situation. I'll be honest. For a person like me, being Asian helps. It gives me an advantage right off the bat. They just assume I'm very smart. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. Maybe I'm an idiot. I don't know. But they just assume I'm smart. So it really that actually helps when you're the first tech hire. So if you went to a good college, really play that up. I went to Cornell University. You just really play that up. And all these things appeal to their sense of vanity. And startup founders are very, very, they have a lot of vanity. They really care about their image and really like how they appear to others. So if they can show off about hiring an MIT guy or a Cornell guy to their buddies in their startup cohort in their accelerator, it makes them feel better about themselves. So you kind of want to play into that emotion. That helps. That's number one. Number two is a small startup that does have a founder, or I'm sorry, an engineering person lead who may be the founder, or just a CTO or the first hire or something like that. And those hiring situations are much more efficient. Um, I don't imagine you'll see this anytime soon, but the part where it gets a little dicey for me is when it becomes very apparent that I'm much better than this engineering who's interviewing me, the engineer who's giving me the interview. By and large, when that person is younger, I would say like just out of college, maybe mid 20s, um, they get uncomfortable with that. They don't. They tend to want to prove that they're smarter than me by throwing me all these obscure vocabulary questions. What's the difference between functional programming and object-oriented and stuff like that? And then if I don't answer it in a textbook way, they kind of like nitpick. So it's a lot of insecurity there, and that's the way it goes. And I don't get those contracts, and that's the cycle of this tech world that we live in. It's very weird in terms of like how certain decisions are played out. Right? I've been told in the last 6 months that I was just way too amateur, and that my skill level is nowhere near professional grade. A tech person actually told me that in about I don't know 5 or 6 months ago, right? And like this guy, he was an older guy. He's probably in his 40s or 50s, and he was grilling me on these like Perl questions and like these language frameworks and languages and frameworks from like the 90s and whatnot that I obviously just had no clue whatsoever. And and so he told his supervisor that basically I was a clown and that interview was over in like 5 minutes. And okay, I guess I'm on my way. Right? And I obviously didn't get that, but I've gotten like 4 other offers since then. I'm working on 2 right now. You get the idea. Like my point is it's weird. It's not like professional sports where you just like whoever's good enough gets in there, right? Sometimes there's a lot of inefficiency that goes on because people making these decisions either are not qualified because they're just not technical. So that's number one. Number two, sometimes their own they're impaired by their own lack of judgment. Like they're threatened, or like they're testing you on skills that nobody uses anymore. Like instead of Git, they're saying you should be using like SVN, stuff like that. And like they're like, have you ever used an SVN system? And well, no, like that nobody uses that anymore. And or like, do you use Java applets? No, like who still does that? Well, maybe the guy who's doing the interview, right? Um, so those are like those. So I've had a few of those, and those interviews are dead on arrival. Like we're all just wasting our time here. Like I just don't realize it until the interview's over. Like, oh, I had zero chance, right? Um, that doesn't happen often, but it does happen. The more common scenario is you're dealing with a guy who is on the level and who is studying the things that you're also looking at. So I shouldn't harp on too much on the other situation, but um, it might be someone like me, for example. Like maybe I'm the guy who's going to interview you for a junior JavaScript position. And these are usually, by and large, very pleasant conversations. Because at the very, very least, what I do is I see what other people at the professional level are working on. And if nothing else, that's helpful. Right? So if this interview ends in a half hour and I don't get this position, this contract, okay, well, that's fine. But now I see what at least one other guy's working on in a high-paying startup in Silicon Valley, and from a tech standpoint, what they're working on, what are their problems, so I had an interview 2 weeks ago with a data science team. I won't say with the company, but there was a data science team, and they were having problems with um, managing their EC2 instances on AWS because they would run these massive scripts that would process millions of rows of like SQL data, and they would tie up their EC2 instance because data science and machine learning you have to process millions of rows of data, and they didn't understand like, well, you have to either set up multiple instances, or you got to set up like a task queue and put that on a task queue server, and like they didn't understand these things, and what it told me is like this is what they're struggling with, right? This is what they're currently trying to solve as a data science team, and that's why they were looking at me as a web engineer. The reason I actually turned that one down because I would have to move to a different city, and I would also have to travel. They said every week to a new city to make a presentation, and I mean normally I would at least entertain that notion, but not for the pay they were offering. So that's why I said I appreciate your time, but no thanks. So getting back to my original point, usually when I'm talking to another tech guy at a startup, we're pretty much on the same page. Typically, we're in the same zone. Like he's working on React Redux. If this was 3 years ago, he's working on Angular 1 and Node Express and stuff like that. In 2017, it's going to be React, some form of React Redux, and whatever backend system they're using. It's actually still a lot of Ruby on Rails and Python Django, and then obviously just Node Express. So I asked them the questions that I would actually ask a person like at a dinner party. Like, how wouldn't be a very exciting party, but what do you deploy on? Do you use Amazon? Do you use DigitalOcean? How many instances do you run? Do you have it sitting behind a load balancer? Are you using GraphQL? Like, how's that working out? Is that better than a REST API? Like, what's the difference between GraphQL and REST? And like, how is that working out for you? Do you regret making that change? Stuff like that. And I would sincerely be asking these questions because I would actually want to know, is it worth my time to look into GraphQL? Should I start looking into Apollo or Relay or whatever, wherever else I'm looking at? Why did you pick React Native instead of going native Swift and stuff like that? And it gives me a lot of input in terms of what other people are working on at the professional level. So if nothing else, it gives you some direction on what you should be working on for the next, in the near future. Obviously, that comes with the caveat that what they're hiring for is germane to what you're studying. So not like if it's like a PHP thing, then I don't think those questions would be relevant. But you get the idea. And basically, whenever that happens, I'm talking to another guy who's studying the same things as I am. It's not even an interview. We're just talking, and then that's it. I can talk forever. It's usually it's usually them saying like, all right, we have to do our next interview, so we got to go. But I could just like, I just keep on talking forever, essentially. Uh, that's number that's number two. Um, Another kind of interview that I encounter, regularly enough, I would say, is basically the quiz interview. Like he'll just start asking you questions. Um, like what's the difference between React and Angular? Like what are the architectural differences? And like go, like just talk, right? and yeah, that happens. I don't know. Just those are just questions you got to think on your feet. And um, in those situations, a lot of what I'm doing is I'm gauging how the interviewer is handling this clearly awkward, somewhat slightly stressful situation for both parties involved, right? Like one thing that happens, it's happened enough in the past few months that I can like I'll say this is something you should watch out for. Is he'll ask you a question like, um, what is what are prototypes in JavaScript, right? Something textbook like that, right? And you answer it, and you stop talking, and then there's dead silence on the other end for literally 30 seconds. He just literally doesn't say anything for 30 seconds, right? And then to the point where you're like, can you hear me? Like, is everything okay? And he's like, yep, I'm just writing all this down. I find that to be very rude. I don't like that at all. And whenever that happens, I'm already thinking, all right, you know what? I don't really, this person's having an ego contest with me. I don't need this, right? Like, I'm not dying for work. I have two big contracts going on right now. Like, I don't have that school. Like, I'm running Velocity. It's going fine, right? So, I, I took the interview because they found me on AngelList or LinkedIn or whatever, and I took it, right? Um, so what it tells me is the kind of person you're dealing with. There's going to be a lot of egos involved, and you have to figure out from your own personality's point of view, how do you handle those? How do you respond to these situations? Not everyone responds the way I do, and I don't respond the way everyone else does. Right? Everyone's different. How well do you know yourself? Right now, one thing I refuse to do is play the ego game. I just don't do it. I disengage immediately and I leave, and that's it. Because anyone who's interested in the ego game, to me, means you're not interested in getting the work done. That's totally different. So like, if I have people on the Slack channels at one of my current companies asking me all the time, well, not all the time, but like asking me like once in a while, like, Dan, did you understand how this works? Dan, if you have any questions about how an API works, feel free to send me, shoot me a message, stuff like that. Keep in mind, on the general Slack channel where everyone else can see that, basically just like putting me on blast right in front of everyone, kind of like saying, hey, little guy, if you can't handle this, just shoot me an email, right? And I don't even respond. But the thing about that for me, this is just for me now. Other people handle this differently, but for me, the more that continues, the more I'm heading out the door, right? And I'm a really good engineer on this team. I'm the only one right now delivering product on time. I'll put it that way. When I say this is going to happen Thursday, it happens Thursday. Like that's what I mean. And there's a whole other dev team of which this guy is part of who's not delivering product on time, right? I don't call him out. I don't care. I'm too old and I'm too tired to care about these things. However, the results speak for themselves. That's all I know. So, when this contract is up, this company is going to want me to stick around full time. They all do. Every single company wants me to stick around full time when we're done, right? I'm just going to be like, nah, I'm going to move on to the next thing. I got a couple other things down the pipe. But I'm not going to tell them why, but this is the reason why, right? And I don't want to work with people like that. Life's too short. I don't care if he's smarter than me. I just don't care. I don't care. I don't have that in me anymore, right? I'm too tired, to be honest. I'm too cranky. I'm too old. This is just it's not what I'm interested in anymore. What I'm interested in now is pushing product out the door, getting Turbo off the ground, getting velocity going. I'm confident enough in my own skills that I don't need to prove it to anybody, right? And if someone thinks I'm an idiot, which quite a few people do, fine by me. Like that's get in line. It's gonna grow soon. Like it's So these are the things that you sort of pick up along the way. It's a little bit harder when you're starting out because you have no frame of reference. So I can certainly see why that could be very damaging early on. Because if you don't have a frame of reference, maybe I do suck at this. Maybe I am an idiot. Maybe I am a shitty programmer, right? Maybe I'm not cut out for this, right? And that could be pretty harmful. What's unfortunate is that in this industry, a lot of these evaluations are just simply erroneous. Like they're inaccurately assessed, right? It would be like if I made an assessment on the NFL readiness of a college football player, right? I've never played football. I'm not a football player, right? So can you imagine if I'm making these evaluations, right? I would be so off with my assessments because I don't know, what constitutes an NFL ready football player other than the obvious, like he can run a 4.2 or whatever, and like that's obvious. But I'm talking like, can he read defenses? Like, can he call an audible at the right time? I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but you get the idea. I would fuck that up, right? That would be bad, right? So, but these things happen in tech. You got people who've literally never programmed before making hiring decisions on programmers. This happens, right? I just told you how to handle that. So, um, these situations are not uncommon. Kind of got off track there. So, I want to get back to how to handle the interview with if there's a tech engineering lead, he might be a CTO, he might be a founder, whatever, who is sort of studying the same things you are, working on the same things. Your goal in those interviews should be to turn those into conversations. That's your goal. Turn those into pleasant, friendly conversations. And be inquisitive. Ask, like, it's hard to fake it. I wouldn't suggest faking it, but if you have to, come up with some questions beforehand that you think would make you look smart, to be honest. Whereas with me, I'm not faking. Like, I actually want to know, are you using EC2 micro instances or mediums, or like, what's your auto scaling group? Like, what's your maximum instance load? Like, how do you set your load balancer? Like I actually want to know that, um, especially with things like GraphQL. Like, I have yet to come up with a I have yet to come across a company that uses GraphQL, but every company asks me about it, so it's on everyone's mind, but no one's using it. So this is one of those weird things where like everyone's kind of looking at one another like, should I do, like, are we supposed to use this? So you definitely want to get, like, questions like that, like, how is your current setup? Um, whatever. At least try to glean some knowledge from a professional on what you're doing, so that if when you're done with the interview, if you don't get it, you still got some insight, professional insight, which is very valuable. The actual interview itself should be as much of a conversation as you can conducively make it, like as much as you can do. A lot of this just takes repetition, a certain comfort level of controlling the flow of conversation, a very delicate balance, especially when you're being the one being interviewed. But once you establish your domain authority, your knowledge base, taking control of a conversation isn't a bad thing, um, as long as your credibility is established. And that's typically what I do within the first 3 to 5 minutes. And then I just sort of take over from there. I just ask, like, what are you working on, and what problems have you come up against, and what's your database and all that stuff. And that's basically it. It also gives me a good idea of like what to expect if I actually end up working with that company. Yeah, so I mean, going back to, it's been over 5 years now. It's summer 2017. Going back 5 years now, I've had maybe like 30 some odd contracts spanning the entire spectrum of, like, I'm the only developer, to now I'm one of 10. One of my current roles is I'm like 1 out of 10 developers, and I find that the ones that end up being the best in terms of work environment and like good learning experience, like the interview wasn't really that much of a stressful experience. The two that I'm thinking right now, like one I'm working on right now, it's a big team, multi-million-dollar budgets. Everyone's very professional, well, except that one guy. And the interview, was, the lead engineer. We just talked for a half hour about React, Redux, JavaScript, where things are going. Do you like TypeScript, stuff like that? And there's no grilling of, I didn't have to submit a 5 hour like take home exam or anything like that. I wouldn't have done that anyway, to be honest. Um, and then there was another follow-up conversation with the founder, who's obviously non-technical. So the founder just wanted to make sure I wasn't an asshole, and just, can will he communicate problems as they come up, and that's it. That's it. 2 half-hour interviews, got the job. That's in the book now. And then the one that I did a number of years back, it was pretty much the same thing, except it was one interview, not even two. It was an iOS role. The guy was, to this day, probably the best iOS engineer I ever met, and he ran a dev shop in Brooklyn, and we just sat down for a half hour. He just like, this is what we're working on. Like, what do you do in your free time? And let me just see some code, and that's it. And he was like, great, sounds good. Start tomorrow. And that's exactly what happened. So, the ones that are good are usually like from senior devs, senior, engineers who just don't have any of that ego issue. They don't have any of that. They're kind of like I am today. They just don't care. They have something to get done. They have a big budget to get it done, and it has to happen. And that's it. And then everything else has to get just pushed aside, right? And that's it. And those are good experiences. And the ones that I regret, I didn't enjoy working, the solo founder, or not the solo founder, but the non-technical teams, like those are difficult because, if I'm dealing with a client, a founder team of like 2 or 3, and none of them are technical, and you're trying to explain technical problems, they think you're just full of shit, to be honest. And they think you're bullshitting them to squeeze more money off the contract bid, and that becomes very difficult when you're the only one. They have no frame of reference, so they're like, should we trust this guy? Like, I don't know if he's just making this stuff up, right? And like, for example, a library deprecation, like React Router deprecated their library. Now React Router 4 has all these changes. I got to go back in and fix all this stuff, and that's going to take a couple hours, if not days, and that becomes very sticky because the client might be like, I don't understand any of what you just said. All I know is that you're going to bill me another $1,000, right? So that could be very tense, and so that's sort of the drawback of working with those situations. So be aware of that if you're in that boat. Yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. If you're looking for freelance work, freelance web development, these are situations that you should be prepared to handle in an interview. And then going back to Turbo, I do plan on creating a platform for developers who want to promote their work. And then I already have a newsletter with companies. So I have 2 newsletters. I have one for people on Turbo, developers, and another one with companies who are looking to hire. So I'm going to start promoting the reason I started putting together the other one a few months ago is because I wanted to start getting companies aware of Turbo as a potential platform for their own development, right? So far, no companies have actually used Turbo for their own development, so I'm having a harder time getting like bigger companies on it, or even just startups, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is start promoting developers currently on Turbo to these companies in the form of a newsletter, email. Excuse me, sorry. So guys who are working on their React Redux chops, so like like Nick Wies, Ian Daly, Jimmy Hong, guys like that. If you guys are watching this, I want to start promoting your work to these companies. So that's the plan in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully, I know at least Ian is close by. You said you're in Connecticut. I'm sorry to announce where you live, but if you're open to working with any startups in the city, that's the plan for me at least, is to start getting other people on Turbo some exposure to get their careers off the ground, their web development career. So that's it. Hopefully this was helpful in some way or another. And if not, I'm sorry. I'll try harder next time.